Professor Denning is a Professor of Practice at Columbia University and a distinguished UQ alumnus whose work has helped shape international policy on food and nutrition security. We're delighted to have you here, Glenn, for this year's TropAg conference, and please join me, everyone, in welcoming Glenn to the podium. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice-Chancellor, for the very kind introduction and welcome, and thanks to the traditional owners for their welcome. It's really a great honour for me to be here at TropAg 2025, my first TropAg. It's especially so, being a UQ alum. I'll be speaking with you today about issues of hunger, environment, and food security. Now, in my career, I don't think there's ever been a time when these issues were more prominent in the media, in public discourse, and in the minds of leaders around the world, including in Australia. So in the next 25 minutes, I hope to, first of all, share an update on the state of world food security. I'd like to provide a framework for understanding food security and its implications. And most importantly, I want to offer a holistic, practical pathway towards investing in a food secure world. So let's get started with a definition of food security. And this is the most comprehensive definition that I've come across over the years. Food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs, their food preferences for an active and healthy life. This came from the 1996 Rome Declaration on Food Security. Now, I distilled those 34 words down to 14. Hopefully, I've captured most of it with this. Universal food security is a world where every person enjoys a healthy diet derived from sustainable food systems. So healthy diets from sustainable food systems. So why universal? Why have I used this term universal? Well, first of all, we have to think of food security as a human right. It was embedded in the 1948 UN Declaration on Human Rights. It was reinforced and elaborated in 1966 in the International Covenant. More recently, 2015, SDG 2 declared that the world would end hunger. And the 2030 Agenda declared that no one will be left behind. That's 10 years ago. So how are we doing? This graph tracks the indicator, one of the indicators of hunger, and that's essentially energy deprivation. The number and the prevalence of undernourished people in the world. And you can see from 2015, basically 2005 down to 2015, it was declining. It went from about 12% to around 8%. But from 2015, oddly, it started to come back up again, and it really peaked around the time of COVID and the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war. So it's dropped a little bit of late, but looking at these graphs, that orange line, the prevalence, it's hard to see an end of hunger by 2030. I don't see the trend really going in that direction. So these are the numbers, the hard numbers. 673 million people, plus or minus, are going hungry, 8.2% of the world population. These are the latest figures we have. 150 million children under the age of 5 are stunted, which means they basically start off in life without the cognitive abilities to succeed in education and later in terms of livelihoods and future incomes. 23.2% of children in that age bracket. Wasting, life-threatening wasting, underweight, okay, underweight for their age. 43 million children at risk of death through starvation. More than 2 billion people suffer various forms of micronutrient deficiencies. Now, on the other end of the nutrition scale, we have 2.5 to 3 billion people who are overweight, 1/3 of them obese, leading to all kinds of risks related to non-communicable diseases. And a recent indicator that's been used a lot is basically affordability of a healthy diet. And we're now finding that about 1/3 of the world population cannot afford what's considered to be a healthy diet. So you bring all of these together, and really we can conclude fairly comfortably that about half of the world's population is basically consuming a less than healthy diet, either under-consuming, over-consuming, to the detriment of their well-being. So the issue of price, you can see here, this is what's called the FAO Food Price Index, and it essentially tracks food prices from the 1960s to more or less to the present. And you can see a steady decline down to the turn of the century, kind of stabilizing up to 2005. So about 20 years ago, aside from the food crisis in the 70s, we've seen prices go up since basically 2007, 2008. So around the last 20 years. And even today, even we've sort of dropped off a little bit since COVID and since the Russia-Ukraine conflict began. We're basically, as of last Friday, it was 117, which is 50% higher than it was 20 years ago. So food prices globally, according to this index, is basically 50% higher than it was 20 years ago. So this is not being missed by consumers. I have a few headlines to share. 90% of Americans are worried about the cost of groceries. Indonesians concerned about high prices of rice, despite a lot of improvement in rice productivity in Indonesia. And just very recently, the Food Bank Hunger Report for 2025 found that 20% of Australian households are described as severely food insecure. Okay, so it's out there. People are aware of the problems, largely at this point associated with the high cost of food. So that's one side of the story. As I said, healthy diets from sustainable food systems. So let's look at the second part, sustainable food systems. Even though we're not succeeding in getting these healthy diets for everyone, how are we doing in terms of sustainability? Well, food security, or the level of food security that we have achieved for 8.2 billion people, has come at a cost. And it's not an exaggeration, really, to talk about humans as an invasive species. We've basically occupied 50% of the usable land on the planet. All right? So deforestation, forest degradation is principally the result of our quest for food security, to feed the population. We're experiencing the sixth great mass extinction of biodiversity, both terrestrial and aquatic. Again, very much driven by food, our quest for food security. Land degradation, erosion, nutrient depletion, water extraction. 70% of all freshwater resources that are extracted from the sources that we have go into agriculture. Okay, and the rest goes into industry and domestic consumption. This is globally. Soil, water, air pollution, and as mentioned earlier today, greenhouse gas emissions. 1/3 of the anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions come from the food system. Now, it doesn't all come from production. About half of that 1/3 comes from actual production, agricultural production, including livestock, including rice production. About 1/3 of it comes from pre- and post-harvest activities, including food waste, of course. And about 20% of that 1/3 comes from land use change. So we can think of food systems as both casualties and contributors to climate change. Let's not forget, the food systems that are here today are the product of climate, largely, and then modified by market opportunities, traditions, and the like. But certainly, we're seeing as the climate is changing, our food systems are having to adapt and develop greater resilience in order to meet the food security requirements on this planet. Mitigation. If you're generating 1/3 of the greenhouse gases, there are opportunities to mitigate, both through reducing greenhouse gas emissions and from carbon sequestration. So there's no doubt, and the World Food Programme reminds us often, that this is a global food crisis like no other. Really, initially, certainly COVID was part of the problem. Conflict, climate change, increasing cost of food, and I would add complacency. All of these factors have led us to the crisis that we're at today. And there's no doubt that the alarm bells are ringing. This is not being lost on leaders. Chinese President Xi Jinping in 2022 described agriculture as a national security issue of extreme importance, not a national food security, a national security issue of extreme importance, and has continued to reiterate basically that message in the last few years. In November 2024, President Lula da Silva launched the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, declaring we have to do much more at the country level. 104 countries have signed up to that, including Australia. A number of universities, including Columbia University, have signed up to support a very high impact, action-oriented program to end hunger and related poverty. COP28 introduced the idea of agriculture and food as part of the climate issue. But as we speak today, as COP began in Belém in Brazil, COP30 is, under Lula's leadership, is very much pushing hard on the nexus of food and climate. It's very much on the agenda. A few months ago, the UN Secretary General at the UN Food Security Summit +4, again, we had a call for action, yet another call for action, accelerated action to transform the world's food systems. And right here in Australia, just very recently, an activity was initiated called Feeding Australia, a National Food Security Strategy. So that was initiated in August 2025, and with the goal of having a national Australian food security strategy within the next year to year and a half. So my take-home points for this first part are as follows. 1, our food system is not delivering in terms of human well-being, particularly in terms of health and environment. We're facing stresses and shocks caused by growing population, changing food demands, environmental degradation, climate change and conflict. Of course, when this happens, the poor and the marginalized are the most vulnerable when we see price shocks, when we see people lose their jobs and lose their income. And it's a fact that food security, food insecurity, is in every country, including this one. So what I'm seeing is national leaders and subnational leaders, local leaders, are stepping up and asking for answers. They're asking for solutions. What do we do about this? So what do we do? About 10 years ago, 11 years ago, in the lead up to the SDGs, the SDGs summit in New York, I really started to put my mind to this. I started to think, how do we actually turn all these good ideas into action? How do we actually achieve zero hunger? How is it even possible? Looking for best practice, relying on peer-reviewed literature, expert opinion. I was very much driven by the idea that the solutions came from understanding science, context, needs, and rights, and not ideology. So that led me to the idea that a comprehensive, holistic strategy would be needed to bring about universal food security. And I'll just go around these 5 areas very quickly. Sustainable intensification, producing more on existing land, but doing so in a sustainable manner. Secondly, market infrastructure. Put simply, connecting farmers to markets, connecting producers to consumers. Post-harvest stewardship. 1/3 of the food we produce is lost or wasted along the value chain. So reducing losses and waste. Healthy diets, as I mentioned before, converging on healthy diets, filling the nutrient gaps and curbing the excesses of consumption. And social protection, not often included in the discussions on food security, but 4.7 billion people in the world get some form of social protection. And many of them use that for their food security. There are many people in the world who cannot produce or buy their way out of hunger. And those are the people who require social protection, underpinned by a lot of cross-cutting investments, including efforts to reduce poverty, gender equality, broad improvements to health and education sectors, and good governance. So let me just run through each of these briefly. Sustainable intensification. Look, many people will tell you, we have all the food we need. I'm sure you've heard it many times. We just need to redistribute it. We just need to make better use of it, cut our losses, cut our waste, and so on. Every scrap of evidence that I've seen, peer-reviewed, expert opinion, everybody leads me to an answer that we will need more food, certainly by 2050 and beyond. Population increases, degradation of existing environments, changing diets, all of these factors suggest we need more food. So how do we get more food? We can do two things. We can intensify on our existing land, or we can extensify. We can expand the land frontier. We can cut down more forests and grow more food, as we have done for thousands of years. Okay, so my conclusion is intensification is the smart way forward. Smart in terms of producing the food and reducing the impact on environment. But it really has to be sustainable intensification. Now, sounds like an oxymoron. If you intensify, how can it be sustainable? But it is possible. We can apply a lot of the principles that we've learned over the years about ecological agriculture, about climate-smart agriculture, and the like. So let me just explain briefly what do I mean by sustainable intensification. The first thing is, I'm not talking about going around every farm on the planet and looking to intensify. That would make no sense, right? So look at it as a process in aggregate, consisting of several components, one of which is there are vast areas, including, I would say, very much across parts of sub-Saharan Africa, where we simply have to get out there and increase yield, increase output from existing farms. There's tremendous potential to do that. You can double production almost anywhere on the continent. There are other areas that are really maxing out already in terms of their productivity and their production. Their production, less their productivity, their production. What we can do there is improve efficiency, precision agriculture, better genetics and the like, to reduce the environmental footprint. The third category is there are basically abandoned and unproductive lands that through science and technology and infrastructure and good policies, we can bring that land back into production. And frankly, there are many parts of the world where we simply need to abandon the idea of annual cropping. We need to move back to forests, to other forms of agriculture, even back to natural forests. And finally, we need to do an extra effort to look after our existing natural ecosystems. So all of this, the net result of all of this, is that we will have more food from more sustainable and resilient production systems and a reduced environmental footprint. That's the core idea of sustainable intensification. The second component, market infrastructure, as I said, connecting farmers to markets. That's where I got my start many years ago in Mindanao, building roads. I wasn't building the roads, I was doing the ag on the side, but the idea that by improving transport, improving access to markets, farmers could improve their livelihoods, and we could also get food to people who need it most. But beyond transport, we also need to be investing in energy infrastructure, particularly cold chain development for any dairy and vegetables and other perishables. Huge opportunities for deploying ICT, including blockchain and artificial intelligence, soft infrastructure that goes in terms of institutions and policies. Post-harvest stewardship, I mentioned 1/3 of what we produce never gets consumed. About 14% goes in basically between on-farm production, on-farm losses, through up to the stage of retail, and about another 17% goes from retail to service waste to household waste. Okay, so there's losses and waste contributing that 1/3. Again, there's lots of things we can do, and it starts with measuring and understanding the context, all right? It's not 1/3 everywhere for every commodity. It's different in different situations. Using a value chain approach, which is very much targeted to specific commodities. Technical innovation has a huge role. Everything from hermetic bags and drums all the way to genetic engineering to reduce post-harvest losses of crops. Behavioral change is absolutely critical here. Education backed up with solid public policies and investment. And of course, market infrastructure, which I mentioned earlier, is important for cutting these losses. I spoke already about healthy diets. I would ask you all to take a look at the recent report of the Eat Lancet Commission. It came out a couple of months ago. It's an update of the 2019 version. Lots of modeling, very heavily based on peer-reviewed literature, very much the IPCC of the food system. The basic conclusion is consuming a planetary health diet, I'll explain that just in a minute, is good for human nutrition, but also good for the planet. So the basic take-home in terms of healthy diets, let's converge on healthy diets. So again, fill the gaps of those who are not consuming the level of nutrition that they need for a healthy and productive life, and curb the excesses of those who are consuming too much. The basic idea of the planetary health diet, in a nutshell, the summary, the 3-line summary is this: more plants, less animal source food. This is in aggregate, okay? This is not every community, every household, but across the planet, more plants, less animal source food, less added sugar, less saturated fats, less salt, and all of this should be applied in context, applied in local and national context. Again, behavioral change, education is absolutely critical. I think nutrition education should be part of every curriculum, including here. It's as important as math and languages. So the last one, social protection. As I mentioned, 4.7 billion people in the world get some form of social protection, but there's still a gap. The World Bank estimates about 2 billion people, and particularly in low and middle income countries, need social protection to improve their food security, whether it's emergency support, whether it's school meal programs, whether it's the SNAP program in the United States, which is under threat, of course. All of these have an impact on people's food security. So in summary, this is it. We're looking at these 5, or I've been looking at, and I've really come to a strong conclusion that if we invest deeply and comprehensively in these 5 areas, as I said again, underpinned by these important cross-cutting investments, we can achieve a food system, a transformation of the food system that is productive, profitable, inclusive, healthy, sustainable, resilient, and ethical. So that is our goal. That is our pathway to universal food security. We're simply not investing enough, I've got to say. We're not investing enough. Many of you in this audience have some connection to the CGIAR, the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research. 15 centres located around the world. You'll hear from some of them at this conference. The fact is, I mean, at best, they're managing about $1 billion worth of investment a year. $1 billion. You know, Coke and Pepsi spend $8 billion a year on marketing. So, like, just put it into context. Think of what you like to just put this into context. It's gross underinvestment in agriculture, in international agricultural research and development. I'll just come back to Australia for a moment. Let's look at our ODA. Look at DFAT, which essentially delivers aid on behalf of the Australian people. Only 8% of the DFAT budget goes into a category called agriculture, trade, and production sectors, right? So I would say that's an underinvestment given the importance of food security, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region that we're looking at here. We could do a lot more. And my third example comes from ACR, the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, ACR has a budget of about $120 million, Australian dollars, by the way. That's 80 million US, right? For an organization that, again, has an amazing track record of building partnerships, building relationships with universities, evidence-based, going out, working with countries, particularly, again, in the Indo-Pacific region. This is an underinvestment. Seriously, we could do much more than what we're doing there. So, my final thoughts to the audience here. I would say, given the scale of the problems that I've been describing, I would strongly urge you to set ambitious goals. This is not a time for incremental changes at the margin. We have to act boldly to have an impact, on global food security. I think we should all be doing a better job of projecting food security as the platform for peace and prosperity, connecting it to peace and prosperity. I think we could mobilize more resources if we did that. I would want every one of you, I'd love to see every one of you think about it, visualize and articulate your place in this food system transformation. What are you doing towards that food system transformation? I would encourage you to foster adversarial collaboration and build unlikely alliances. Okay, so to go out there, get out of your comfort zone, build links. If you're in the public sector, work with the private sector. If you're used to working with a small NGO, look at the opportunities for working with businesses, small, medium enterprises, even multinational organizations. So think more creatively about partnerships to get the results, because it's so complicated. No single organization, no single sector has the answers. Look for blended solutions, okay? Get out of your laneway. We're all sort of in a lane, and we have trouble looking at solutions outside of what's appropriate or what we're used to in that lane. But look for blended solutions. Organic agriculture and genetic engineering. Let's think about that. Why not? There are many other ways in which we can do that. And I would say my final point, and I'm glad the Vice-Chancellor is here, we need to prepare and unleash a new generation of informed practitioner leaders. These are people who are going to make the change. People make the change. Institutions don't make changes. Individuals make changes. And I see, as we sort of work our way up what I sort of see as a theory of change, these folks can become agents of transformation in the public-private sectors, in the third sector, the NGOs, philanthropies and the like, higher education institutions, as well as in their role as individuals, across those 5 investment areas, working at different levels, international, national, and local. All of this, I would like to think, leads us to this idea that we can achieve a world where every person enjoys a healthy diet derived from sustainable food systems. This universal food security, which is, for me, it's a vision, but it's also an aspiration that I hope will unite everybody in this room today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenn, for just really putting TropAg into context and giving us some great challenges. We are going to just see if there are a couple of questions, but I might ask one first, Glenn, if that's okay. I mean, it's easy in this world to feel a bit overwhelmed by some of the things that are going on, and we have, you put the word adversarial up there, and we see abundance weaponized against those who are not abundant. And I wondered, underneath that line that you showed of the 2015 result, and then it's got worse again in terms of food security, do you see any examples of continued positive change? Are there examples in the world that we can really hang on to and say, yep, if we solve some of those big conflicts, we are on the right track from a system or a technology point of view? Or is it just too overwhelming?
I think we can I think we can look to examples around the world of where leaders have stepped up and said, we are serious about this. And I gave a couple of examples in my talk. I think 2 places to look. One is China. One is Brazil. 2 very different countries. China very much dependent, really needing to have food security through partnerships with others. Brazil being a major exporting country. I mean, both of them have been, I think, great successes, but it's work in progress. There's no single example that they've actually nailed it, right? But one of the things I've concluded over the years is that it all comes down to self-interest. Sorry to say, sad, right? That nations are motivated by self-interest. And, clearly China, for social and political stability, cannot afford to be food insecure, right? And Brazil needs agriculture to really fuel its efforts to become a high-income country at some point. And frankly, the message I gave a few weeks ago at the Crawford Fund in Canberra, was that it's in Australia's best interest to be serious about this topic. We live in a region that struggles with food security, the Pacific Islands, Southeast Asia, South Asia. There are lots of challenges there, and we can be part of that solution. So I think ACR, I think Coffee and others need to step up and remind our leaders that this is, an issue of major security and strategic importance for the region.
Thank you. There's a question there. We can take 1 or 2 from the floor, and then we'll
Thank you, Glenn, for your nice presentation. So I'm here.
Wave your arm. Yep. Yeah, okay.
Little boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can hear me? Yeah, so my background is from developing countries to developed countries, so I work in both areas. So based on my experience, I have seen produce are not financially empowered, especially small producers. And do you think, especially when you look at go to the field, you can see a lot of fruit losses, but when they're selling the good ones to Woolworth or Coles. The bad ones, they can't sell it. So they are giving it to some people who can take free of cost, but they are not making any money. So that's why in most of the cases, they are not making a lot of money so that they can contribute a lot in agriculture. Do you think we need to invest more on financial empowerment of the small producers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, small producers are various estimates, 500 million to 600 million small-scale farming producers in the world contribute a lot to food security around the world. And so I think we're under-investing. There are some real challenges. There's the issue of scale, and I'm sure, in your personal situation, you've seen situations where it's just, there may be a market, but it's difficult for smallholders to get together and produce at the right time, at the right quantity and the right quality to meet that. I don't have an answer except that's why number 2 of my 5 is market infrastructure, and it's not just about transport, it's about policies as well. What to do going forward? I'd say finance and insurance are 2 major areas of interest. And I would say that's one area where I think there's great potential to deploy artificial intelligence. That is one area where I think we might be able to use the skills, the tools of big data and artificial intelligence to do a better job of connecting large numbers of smallholder farmers to market opportunities.
Last one, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Gilbert Siame from Zambia. I really enjoyed your presentation. I come from a background of urban development, but I work on urban food systems as well. I'm wondering, the proposition you put is very inspiring, but I'm wondering the place of cities and urbanization in the way we think about ending hunger and food insecurity globally. And as you reflect on that wonder of the question, we have, by 2050, we have about 60% of the people that will live in cities. And of that, about 3 billion will be in informal situations, living in very precarious conditions, perhaps needing a lot of support. So in the way we think about ending hunger and food insecurity, and nutrition insecurity, where do you think and how do you think we need to engage with the question of urbanization and the role of cities in addressing some of the things that you put forward? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I'll try to give, that's a really important question. 55% of people today live in urban areas, right? So agriculture is mostly supporting those people. The reason why Asia became such a powerhouse in terms of exports, it was very much driven by agricultural productivity improvement, relatively low food prices that made Asian exports more competitive. So there's a strong connection between rural and urban economies. The last thing I would suggest is, we should put all of our attention on rural areas alone. We need to be working on urban development because obviously people in urban areas working in manufacturing and services, they need income. They get their food security through income. So I think having a sort of a dual process of investing in rural areas, helping with agricultural productivity improvement and transformation, combined with industrial policies that improve competitiveness, manufacturing, services, and the like. That's where I would go, building income opportunities for urban people. Where I sort of ease off a bit is when I'm being asked to put a lot of attention onto urban agriculture. I truly don't believe the future of agriculture is urban. I think there are opportunities for urban agriculture, but that should not divert us too much from the importance of ensuring that rural areas improve their productivity, do it sustainably, generate surpluses, reduce losses, and make sure that that food can reach urban areas in a cost-effective manner, and that people in those urban areas are earning incomes that enable them to buy the food that they need, the healthy food that they need. Thank you.
We'll leave it there. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Glenn. Thank you again. Look, I can't help myself but comment that, Glenn, we're great in Australia at talking the talk. I think it's quite regrettable that we aren't investing more in our region and in this global partnership. And I think it's really, we're going to hold the Olympics here in a few years. We're spending who knows how many billions of dollars to do that. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but we should also be investing more in agriculture and development in our region. Glenn and I share, and along with many others in this room, the privilege of having worked in international development in centres such as the International Rice Research Institute, and I'm delighted that we have colleagues from other centres here, from ILRI, from ICRISAT, from CIMMIT, but also really importantly from the national partners across the globe, the National Agricultural and Research and Extension Services, who are really on the ground doing so much of the work in the tropical and subtropical regions.